Page 321 continued. New concept of reality. The stream of consciousness is a revolutionary technique because of the fact that it is based on a revolutionary concept of reality. It is a common practice to contrast modernism with realism, as if the moderns were not concerned with reality. They were, in fact, as much concerned with reality as any of their predecessors. I think there is a printing mistake. I repeat again. It is a common practice to contrast modernism with realism, as if the moderns were not concerned with reality. They were, in fact, as much concerned with reality as any of their predecessors. But their concept of reality was very different as their technique of presenting it. For them, reality is not something superficial, mechanical, rational, or purely, quote, scientific, unquote, comma, but something deeper, mythical, illogical, or even irrational. In her justly famous essay, quote, The Modern Novel, Virginia Woolf enunciates the new concept of reality as also the new concerns of the modern psychological novelists like Joyce and herself, even as she rejects the theory and practice of her Edwardian predecessors like Wells, Galsworthy, and Bennett. There is no unquote sign. She denounces these novelists as, quote, materialists, unquote, who delight in the, quote, solidity of the fabric, unquote, without venturing to come to grips with the inward reality of life. They make a lot of fuss about creating lifelike characters, all dressed and buttoned up. They make a fetish of coherence, causality, probability, plot making, and the other paraphernalia of novel making. As for herself, she will render life as it is really experienced by human beings. And what is life? Virginia Woolf says, quote, life is not a series of lamps symmetrically arranged, semicolon. Life is luminous halo, comma, a semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end, ... Let us record the atoms as they fall upon the mind in the order in which they fall, comma. Let us trace the pattern, comma. However disconnected and incoherent in appearance, comma, which each sight of incident scores upon the consciousness, stop, unquote. Page 322. Para. Advantages of using the stream of consciousness technique. The stream of consciousness technique bestows at least three major advantages on the novelist. They are 1. Freedom from the constraints of time, 2. Complete objectivity, 3. Greater inwardness and profundity. Let us elaborate. 1. The stream of consciousness is, according to Deiches, comma, quote, a means of escape from the tyranny of the time dimension, stop, unquote. Quote, traditionalists, comma, unquote, as Ward puts it, comma, quote, keep their eyes upon the calendar and the clock, stop, unquote. But because human consciousness is not a respecter of time, and the job of the psychological novelist is to render this, time loses its tyrannic rigidity. The stream of consciousness differs from a stream of water insofar as it can course both up and down at various speeds, subverting all chronological barriers. Thus, one speciality of the stream of consciousness novelists is their daring experiments with time. Joyce in Ulysses (the locus classicus of the stream of consciousness novel (bracket closed) has confined the outward action to a single day, June 16, 1994. Whatever is experienced by the consciousness of the three central characters on that day is tendered by Joyce in 1000 pages or so. In Mrs. Dalloway, Dalloway, Virginia Woolf, too, confines the outer plot to one day in 1923. However, her handling of time is so subtle that reminiscence, reverie, and even hallucination form a delicate and very suggestive pattern which offers the reader not only an insight into the deep recesses of Mrs. Dalloway's mind, but also into the mystery and meaning of life itself. Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse comprises three parts. The first and third cover the outer action of a day's each, while the middle one, which is the shortest of all, covers a period of 10 years. Such free handling of time is an obvious advantage. Para 2. As Beach puts it, the progress of 20th century novel is marked by the disappearance of the author. In other words, narrative has approached the condition of drama. The stream of consciousness novelist tries to render the flow of the consciousness of a character as directly and as objectively as possible, without any comment. He tries to remain out of the picture. The true literary artist, in Joyce's words, quote, like the God of creation, remains within or behind or beyond or above his handwork, invisible, refined out of existence, indifferent, paring his fingernails, unquote. Para 3. Thirdly, by shifting interest from the experiential reality to the experiencing self, the stream of consciousness novelist can achieve an inwardness which is difficult to achieve by conventional means. Virginia Woolf has characterized Mrs. Dalloway and Mrs. Ramsay by illuminating the recesses of their psyche with an amazing authenticity. And Joyce's Bloom holds the distinction of being the fictional hero most thoroughly characterized in world literature. It is not only the depth and breadth of characterization which distinguish the work of stream of consciousness novelists, but also their penetrating insights into the dilemmas of existence. What they exactly convey or imply is often debatable, no doubt, but it could have been put across by no other means. Para. Disadvantages. There are mainly two disadvantageous objections to the stream of consciousness technique. A. Disregard of material, outer reality. B. Lack of form and pattern and even meaning. Let us elaborate. A. The stream of consciousness novelist concentrates only on that minuscule component of reality which impinges on the consciousness of his characters. He shows no interest in events, even earth-shaking ones, which do not do so. Thus, he fails to render life in its wholeness. Para. B. Liberating themselves from the tyranny of time, the stream of consciousness novelists expose themselves to the danger of chaos and formlessness. Adherence to chronology is a restraint, but it also ensures clarity of contours. Ulysses is indeed a tour de force, but for many readers it is still an enormous puzzle. The last 50 or so pages of the novel render the stream of consciousness of Molly, M-O-L-L-Y, Bloom, B-L-O-O-M, without any mark of punctuation. Joyce's next novel, Finnegan's, F-I-N-N-E-G-A-N-S, Wake, W-A-K-E, is still more difficult to follow. To the uninitiated, it looks like a mass of words, several of which are not to be found in any dictionary. Page 323 para. James Joyce, 1882 to 1941, is one of the prominent novelists of the 20th century. He is the main exponent of the stream of consciousness novel, and his Ulysses is the finest example of the use of this technique in modern fiction. In Joyce, quote, the 20th century passion for experiment in literary form reached its climax, unquote, stop. Dubliners, Dubliners, a portrait of the artist as a young man, and Finnegan's Wake are among his more important works. Para. In Dubliners, 1914, a collection of short stories, he throws light on the life of the slum dwellers of Dublin. The stories are objective and realistic in character and are written in a simple and direct style. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, 1916, is an autobiographical work in which the artist Dedalus, Dedalus, the chief protagonist, stands for the novelist. Quote, as a revelation of Joyce's power to explore the psychology of his own nature with detachment and scientific curiosity, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is unparalleled in a period rich in self-analysis. Pride and sensuality struggle for the possession of the soul of Stephen Dedalus, who, having rejected the help of religion, seeks to escape into tranquility through the impersonality of art, unquote, says Diana Neil, Neill, stop, para. Ulysses, 1922, Ulysses, is Joyce's masterpiece. In this novel, the stream of consciousness technique finds its best exposition. The novel is set in Dublin, and it seeks to represent and reconstruct Dublin life in all its sordid realism. It narrates in a rambling manner the wanderings of Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus through the city of Dublin on one particular day. The novel is extremely formless, loose, and incoherent. It is the reduction and ad absurdum, absurdum, of the extreme subjective method. Diana Neil says rightly, quote, the book is unintelligible and its formal complexities have left readers baffled and confused, stop. However, its style is marked with rare ingenuity, witticism and satirical flashes, stop. The novel has been called a, single quote, comic epic, single quote, unquote, in which the novelist went deeper and farther than any other novelist in his handling of the interior monologue and the stream of consciousness technique. Ulysses may be little read today, but Joyce's greatness as an artist cannot be questioned. Stop, but there is no unquote sign. Para. In Finnegan's Wake, 1939, quote, subtlety and complexity produce incomprehensibility. It is a study of the history of the human race from its earliest beginnings, as seen through the incoherent dreams of one Mr. Earwicker, Earwicker, stop. The use of an inconsecutive narrative and of a private vocabulary adds to the confusion, but it cannot conceal the poetic fervor, the power and brilliant verbal skill of the works, unquote, according to Albert. Para. Dorothy Richardson, 1873-1957, though considered less important today than Virginia Woolf, influenced her and the subsequent women novelists considerably with her novel Pointed Roofs, 1915. It was something new which Dorothy Richardson did in this novel. She endeavored to give both the subjective and the objective biography of a character, a young worn named Miriam Henderson. The description is entirely subjective. It is the stream of Miriam's consciousness that Miss Richardson reproduces without any interference on her own part. Her novel is truly feminine, and she comes closest of all English novelists to reality and accuracy in a study of the mind of a woman. No novelist has succeeded so well in presenting feminine psychology. Para. Catherine Mansfield, 1888 to 1929, is a writer of short stories, and during her lifetime 5 volumes of her stories were published. She was an impressionist in her art and sought to portray objectively, quote, the significant moment in human relationship, the curious and subtle adventure and the poignant ironies of contrasting human emotions, unquote, stop. She studied life objectively and, quote, understood characters widely divergent from herself in both temperaments and accidental, unquote, stop. In her story, she has tried to present the weariness and frustrations of modern English life. Quote, her stories are marked with a note of somberness and are characterized with a haunting sense of pathos. Stop, unquote. The prelude, to the Bay, B-A-Y, the Fly, F-L-Y, and the Garden Party represent at its best the subtle psychological and Catherine Mansfield. Para. Virginia Woolf, 1882-1941, belongs to the school of, quote, stream of consciousness, unquote, novelists. She is one of those great English novelists of the 20th century who had the courage to break free from tradition and then to give a new direction, a new form, and a new spiritual awareness to the English novel. She began writing in the established tradition of the novel. Her first 2 novels, The Voyage Out and Night and Day, are largely traditional. But soon she realized the inadequacy of the traditional novel and adopted the stream of consciousness technique in The Jacob's Room, her 3rd novel. Her art rapidly matured, and her next 2 novels, Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, represent the consummation of the novel of subjectivity. Page 324, para. She is not one of the architects of the, quote, stream of consciousness novel, unquote. She is not its originator, but it is in her novels that, quote, the stream of consciousness, unquote, technique finds its balance. She has succeeded in imposing form and order on the chaos inherent in the novel of subjectivity. In this way, as R.L. Chambers puts it, she has brought this particular genre of the novel out of the realm of, quote, stunt, S-T-U-N-T, literature, unquote, and has made it an acceptable and coherent art form. She was also one of the most forceful and original theorists of, quote, the stream of consciousness novel, unquote, and by her exposition of the aesthetics of this kind of novel, she did much to throw light on its technique and to bring out its superiority to the conventional novel. Para. Elizabeth Bowen, 1899 to 1973, is a prominent novelist of exceptional individuality. She is a close follower of the technique of Virginia Woolf. The Heat of the Day and Last September are her chief novels. Like Mrs. Woolf, she is interested in the study of the human heart. She studies life around her with an artistic detachment and presents her impressions of life in a delicate, subtle style characterized by feminine sensitiveness. She presents the social comedy of manners with an ironically sympathetic understanding. She may not attain the extraordinary fullness of Virginia Woolf, and the characters may not react to London life with the same intensity as does Mrs. Dalloway, but but our senses are always being appealed to by an observer who is more obviously feminine than Virginia Woolf. Semicolon. Physical details of the body, careful appraisal of dress, match the insight into feminine moods, unquote, says Collins. Like Virginia Woolf, she has achieved greater success in the depiction of her women than her men, para. The years around the termination of World War II constitute something like watershed in the history of the English novel. Both Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, who were among the greatest of the modernists, died in 1941, and it seemed that a great era had come to an end with them. Thereafter is a perceptible decline in the British novel. The post-Ulysses novel lacks what Carl calls, quote, the moral urgency of a Conrad, the verbal gifts and wit of a Joyce, the vitality and all-consuming obsession of a Lawrence, unquote. On the whole, there has been less of experiment and innovation in the post-1950 English novel and more of parochialization and what is called, quote, little Englandisms, unquote. Lacking the force and originality of their great modern predecessors, the English novelists of recent years sometimes look like feeble imitators of the giants gone by. Quote, one common characteristic, unquote, of most novelists of recent years is, in Curl's words, quote, their inability to deepen and develop with time. When Elizabeth Bowen, for example, experiments in the heat of the day, she does little more than what Virginia Woolf had tried in Mrs. Dalloway 15 years earlier. When Joyce Carey, in The Horse Mouth and elsewhere, tampers with language, he barely scrapes the surface of what Joyce attempted with words. When Durrell talks about love in his Alexandria Quartet, he points towards but hardly reaches Lawrence's examination of love. When Graham Greene uses moral issues without a religious frame of reference, he is dealing with a subject that many 19th century novelists wrote about extensively and with greater range, unquote. Provincialization, para. Carl's wholesale deprecation of the post-1950 English novelists seems to ignore the work of some genuine and bold experimenters and innovators like Beckett, Fowles, Fowles, B.S. Johnson, and Golding, who have made solid contributions to both the range and technique of the novel. We shall consider these novelists later. Here let us point out a feature of the British novel, its growing provincialism and tendency to sever international links. Interestingly, while the novel in other countries such as France, America, Germany and even India to some extent is becoming more international, the novel in England is becoming parochial and provincial. Earlier English novelists were much more Catholic than their descendants. Take Lawrence, for example, the most English of English novelists, and yet look at his range and the breadth of his mind. He has written novels set in Mexico, Australia and Italy. The growing narrow English outlook, well represented by Kingsley Amis in his novel with the suggestive title I Like It Here, 1958, which in the words of Bradbury and Palmer, Palmer, quote, devoted itself to mocking the experimental and expatriate tradition in the novel, comma, blamed on Henry James, comma, and celebrating the commonsensical realist, comma, English virtues of Henry Fielding, comma, while also indicating how much better England was than anywhere fancied abroad, stop, unquote. Page 325. Most new English novelists were not much bothered by the dilemmas of existentialism and absurdism, nor were they keen to experiment with new fictional forms. Carl trenchantly remarks, quote, the novel in Joyce's hand was internationalized, semicolon. In Carey's and Waugh's, Waugh', anglicized, stop, unquote. Para, tradition and innovation. We can well understand the implications of such paradoxes and Bargonese's that the novel is no longer novel, and Carl's that, quote, contemporary English novel is not modern, stop, unquote. The lack of, quote, novelty, unquote, and, quote, modernity, unquote, makes the post-1950 English novel look like a poor cousin of the French or the American novel, in which bold experimentation with both theme and technique is more a rule than an exception. However, it will be extremely unjust to say that all English novelists of recent years are sedate and spunkless traditionalists harking back to their Victorian compatriots. Beckett, Fowles, and Johnson, for instance, are as bold innovators as any in the continent or in America, and even novelists like Golding, Iris Murdoch, and Muriel Spark, who accept tradition in some respects, yet open up new horizons in some others. Only time will decide the comparative merit of contemporary novelists, like it has already done that of their predecessors like Lawrence, Forster, Joyce, Woolf, and Conrad. So we have to wait for time to do the sifting and see what is grain and what is chaff. CHAFF, stop, para. Let us now consider the work of the experimentalist and the traditionalist one by one. Bracket. It must be understood, however, that these two group names are only relative terms and not absolute, like, say, quote, ship, SHEEP, unquote, and, quote, goats, unquote, stop. A ship cannot be a goat at the same time, but a novelist who is largely a traditionalist can also be an experimentalist, and vice versa. Further, as the number of practitioners of the craft is unmanageably large, we shall have to limit ourselves to just a handful of them, bracket closed, stop.